Hello, this is Chris Reilly, author of the book AI and Sin: How Today's Technology Motivates Evil. This presentation will introduce some of the arguments and explanations from the book. First, let me introduce myself and why I wrote this book. I have been an independent scholar for a while, having written numerous academic and more general interest articles in the fields of theology, bioethics, and philosophy. My education includes a doctorate in Catholic theology and master's degrees in moral theology, philosophy, and public affairs. One of my major interests is bioethical topics, including abortion, genetic testing and engineering, eugenics, IVF, and more. There is something that connects these topics to the development and use of advanced technologies like artificial intelligence. I think that what unites the moral issues surrounding these topics is a significant decline in moral understanding of the dignity and nature of persons. There are just too many temptations, too much disorientation caused by new technical capabilities, and all this leads to undermining our respect for the fullness of human nature and to treating other human beings as merely products or tools to be used and then cast aside. Christians see this problem very clearly, but our response to it is often muddled and based on gut reactions to the increase in a secular consumer culture that embraces technology as if it is a new kind of savior. What we need to understand and express very clearly is what might be the reason that new technologies, which are so beneficial for us and which reflect our God-given creativity and efforts toward better care for our world, can also lead us to a poor respect for humanity and ultimately to a damaged relationship with God. My book about AI is meant to address that concern and help to explain it in some way. If you even follow just the headlines in news publications and social media, you'll know that new developments in artificial intelligence technology, or AI, offer some very exciting opportunities as well as concerning effects. Despite the opportunities, the American public is beginning to worry about the true value of AI in our work, play, and daily lives. Around half of Americans who responded to a new survey by YouGov said they are very concerned about each of the following: the spread of deepfakes, which are video or audio clips that falsely add the voice or face of a victim to various scenarios, the erosion of personal privacy, the spread of political propaganda, and the manipulation of human behavior. Now, worry about the harmful effects of bad use of AI usually derives from a view of AI as essentially a neutral tool that people with various intentions can choose to utilize for either good or bad applications. I'm going to present an alternative perspective. My presentation will focus on serious moral and spiritual concerns about AI, but it is not a call for avoiding use of AI in all contexts. It is also not intended to discourage anyone about the possibility of virtuous living with AI, as difficult as that might be. What we need to ask is, if AI has both good and bad uses, how do we then evaluate the morality of developing and using AI? And what are the effects of AI on our moral habits? In one important sense, we might claim that AI is neutral because it does not have a moral will of its own or a completely decisive influence on human behavior. The real moral responsibility lies with the developers, producers, and users of AI models and applications, because it is those persons who have free will. On the other hand, no technological artifact or system is really neutral in its impact on us. It always has physical, structural, and even ideological influences on our thoughts and behavior. These influences vary by context and social expectations. Neil Postman argued in his modern classic, Technopoly, that embedded in every tool is an ideological bias, a predisposition to construct the world as one thing rather than another, to value one thing over another, to amplify one sense or skill or attitude more loudly than another. In a real simple example, think of the technologically influenced difference between how you sit in a plush armchair or in a beautifully carved wooden chair. Would you slouch or kick off your shoes and curl up your legs casually when sitting in the wooden chair? It would not only be uncomfortable, but it would probably also feel socially awkward or somehow wrong to do. That's how the technical natures of the chairs have both a physical and a social, or even kind of a moral effect on us. Pope Francis highlighted the dangers of such influences with his description of the technocratic paradigm. This is an ideology that is favored in a hyper-technological society. Francis also tied this technocratic paradigm directly to AI. The technocratic paradigm is a way of thinking encouraged by our use of technology in our world, not the only possible perspective, but one that has become dominant. Because we are usually focused on the utility or efficiency of our technologies, they encourage habits of control, use, and manipulation of things in the world around us. To put it simply, these habits are often transferred to our relationships with other persons and the environment, which we may also attempt to control, use, and manipulate. This way of thinking has deep implications. When a person engages in the technocratic paradigm, there is a kind of intentional distance or even an opposition between the personal subject and their object. Therefore, with this paradigm, little attention is given to appreciating the goodness and nature that are already inherent in the things that are manipulated. There is a lack of care. AI can also make us question our understanding of ourselves, both as individual selves and as part of the human species. For example, when we compare human persons to highly capable, intelligent machines, what does it really then mean to be a person? Can machines someday become persons in a spiritual and moral sense? And what does it mean to be truly intelligent? Is it possible to put a human being's consciousness into a computer? Is intelligence only based on factual data, computations, and statistical probabilities? These are questions that I touch upon in various parts of my book. The point I am making, and which I discuss further in my book, is that the characteristics, effects, and influence of AI on persons are not neutral by any means, and that the very notion of moral neutrality has important implications. Let's now turn to my core argument. My argument is that the nature and use of AI strongly encourage the vice of instrumental rationality, which in turn leads the developers, producers, and users of AI and its machines toward the sin of acedia. This is not an argument that AI is itself evil, but it is a very serious warning about its motivational effects. I'll briefly describe the sin and vice of acedia for those who are unfamiliar with it. Acedia, or acedia, or acedia, which comes from us from Latin and Greek terms, is often translated as sloth, but this word can mislead people to define the sin as merely laziness. Acedia is much more than that. Acedia leads at different times to apparently opposite behaviors: depressed idleness and an anxious inability to be at rest, either physically or spiritually. This is a profoundly distressing condition. Acedia can take different forms as a vice, sin, and even a mortal sin. A mortal sin is a grave matter that results in loss of the theological virtue of charity as well as of the state of grace. In St. Thomas Aquinas' writings, acedia is defined as sorrow about spiritual good, inasmuch as it is a divine good. With acedia, the sinful person feels a current loss of the divine good and struggles against the resignation, anxiety, restlessness, and doubt that cause the physically and mentally experienced sorrow. Acedia is the sorrow which undermines, decreases, and is experienced as the contrary passion to the joy that is associated with the theological virtue of charity, which is true friendship with God by His grace. The sinner willfully turns away from the divine good as it is participated in by human beings. It is an aversion to the experience of joy over our participation in life with God, because the effects of that life are somehow experienced as distasteful or burdensome. Acedia in its mortal form is therefore a kind of intentional response to a spiritual weariness that inspires, in the words of St. Thomas, dislike, horror, and detestation of the divine good on account of the flesh utterly prevailing over the spirit. Now, the flesh here basically refers to love of the self, not just to bodily desires. That's all I'll say about acedia here, although there is much more about it in my book, including a review of the original understanding of acedia by Evagrius Ponticus. Now let's turn to a description of instrumental rationality. We can start by distinguishing it from instrumental reason or reasoning, which is more familiar to most people. Instrumental reason or reasoning is a logical pursuit of pragmatic interests that guides the choice of means that will help to accomplish an end or purpose. On the other hand, my use of the term instrumental rationality, which is derived from the theories of sociologist Max Weber, refers to a persistent disposition or habitual behavior that focuses on the successful use, acquisition, possession, or control of means that accomplish a person's given ends, rather than attending to the choice and guidance of appropriate ends, that is, good, moral, or fulfilling ends. The successful use of means is usually expected to be effective, efficient, or maximal. To give you a real-world example, as a doctor, you might use an existing AI application that acts as a scribe, and after recording discussions with patients, automatically writes up full medical reports, complete with a description of the diagnoses, lists of next steps, new prescriptions, etc. This saves a lot of time for you as a doctor. Now, a habit of instrumental rationality might drive you to use the newly available time to see more patients and earn more income, rather than spending greater time with your existing patients. This is behavior that is efficient, effective, and oriented to maximal results, but it may not be taking into consideration such virtues as charity and justice, nor does it consider the importance of maintaining personal and professional integrity. By defining instrumental rationality as essentially a vice, our focus is on the lasting, general dispositions and behaviors of persons. This brings the concept into discussions of morality. I argue that instrumental rationality is a vice because it is a habitual disposition that makes striving for one's beatitude, one's ultimate happiness, difficult, even frustrating, and sometimes to an extreme degree. One crucial reason is that it is fundamentally not possible to definitively secure or acquire eternal life with God through some means that cause the end to be attained. We can't control or necessarily cause the outcome. This requires God's grace and love. Of course, our efforts in attaining holiness and virtue and in accomplishing good works with love and charity are still very important, not least because they help to form us into better participants in our relationships with God. Very much unlike a life of virtue, a life dominated by instrumental rationality involves not only distraction from our true beatitude or happiness, but also an emphasis on limited ends that we can reliably cause through our choice of effective or efficient means. Instrumental rationality is also not conducive to a fully developed kind of love. Pope Benedict XVI taught that, in the form of love called eros, the person or subject is oriented to their own desires and trying to acquire and possess the loved object. It seems that this narrow kind of love may be associated with a disposition of instrumental rationality if it is focused only on efficiently or effectively satisfying desires. There is another form of love, however, called agape. With agape, a person seeks a kind of self-expansion or self-giving by taking on the interests of the object of their love, perhaps even seeking a spiritual communion with them. They truly appreciate the goodness found in the person they love. In this way, the spiritual distance between subject and object is bridged. Such a self-giving love would seem wildly irrational to somebody who has a disposition of instrumental rationality. To summarize, my observation is that instrumental rationality leads a person toward means and ends that have a limited potential for enabling true joy in the person. If instrumental rationality is the dominant mode of being for a person, they will feel alienated from an end, their true beatitude, that seems ever more difficult to understand and experience. The result may be engagement in acedia as sorrow, anxiety, and resigned or resistant sloth. In my book, I have a much more involved discussion of instrumental rationality and what the recent popes and the Bible have to say about it. But for now, let's talk about one of the problems that AI leads to acedia through the effects of instrumental rationality. Anthropomorphism is a big word, but it simply refers to the tendency to perceive and relate to a non-human object as if it were human. Melanie Mitchell explains that anthropomorphism is based in language games or metaphors. Think of words associated with AI, such as agents, thinking, reasoning, acting, intelligence, etc., that usually describe human persons. For many who develop AI, these characterizations are essentially wishful thinking, looking for hints of humanity in machine-based systems that have capabilities that are analogous to, but not equal to, human abilities. The exaggerations about the capabilities and nature of AI are also not harmless. The very notion of artificial general intelligence, or AGI, is an exaggeration. AGI is supposed to represent something very close to human intelligence, but even the operational definitions of AGI hardly resemble the full sentience, creativity, emotions, and moral intuition of human beings. For example, the company OpenAI defines AGI in its internal documents as outperforming humans at most economically valuable work. This is much more limited than the AGI that is spoken about in breathless public exaggerations. Also, it is worth considering that if there ever really could be such a thing as an artificial consciousness, then we would lose much of our motivation to believe that human beings truly have free will. If conscious beings can be manufactured, programmed, and determined by their creators, then consciousness really loses its meaning as something that characterizes persons who are truly free agents. In a world focused on instrumental rationality, when AI-governed machines match or exceed certain computational abilities of human beings, we will likely find that many people will lose their appreciation of broad, multivalent intelligence, that is, intelligence with many applications, or even the intrinsic value of humanity itself. Hyperbole about AGI exacerbates emotional anxiety and anticipation, and such existential anxiety may distract persons from other important concerns, as well as positive efforts to engage in hopeful prayer, virtues development, and divine worship. The anxiety may suppress the will of persons to consistently assert their unique dignity as children of God, to live out the virtue of magnanimity. Psychological studies do show that existential anxiety has a negative effect on the religious coping of persons who suffer the anxiety. It generates a felt conflict with the divine and others, caused by difficulty in finding significance in life. Persons attracted to anthropomorphism are vulnerable to attaching emotionally to a charismatic or sympathy-inducing AI-governed machine, chatbot, or other application. They may self-disclose more personal information than is wise when interacting with the AI-governed application or other parties. Some users have been found to suffer guilt or remorse if they perceive that a human-like, AI-governed application is being disappointed or hurt. There is a danger that users may come to prefer interaction with the chatbot or robot to socializing with other persons. This can happen especially because the chatbot or robot is more frequently available, perceived to be less likely to share secrets, or less likely to argue with the user. Often chatbots are programmed to be too accommodating and agreeable to the user and become mere sycophants, people-pleasing ego boosters in interactions. This can lead to social or such issues as extreme reinforcement of the user's narrow beliefs and ideologies. This situation might overinflate the user's sense of self-esteem. Some research shows that excessive praise and self-evaluations can lead to poor social skills, narcissism, and even lower experienced self-esteem in the long run. Another interesting problem is called assimilation-induced dehumanization. That's a big term, but basically it's a process by which persons who initially interact with an AI-governed chatbot or robot as if it were human are inevitably disappointed that the machine is less than human, perhaps by appearing less empathetic or unable to respond to complex requests. The person then assimilates that negative judgment to apply also to human persons they encounter. For example, a customer service representative who gets on the phone after a chatbot has failed to resolve a problem. The more the AI-driven robots show human-like characteristics of agency, the more this phenomenon is enhanced. So with assimilation-induced dehumanization, the persons that encounter the AI applications will judge human beings they encounter in a similar way to their angry or distressed assessment of the exemplar robots. They will actually begin to dehumanize other persons, for example, the customer service employees, and mistreat them. There are also some very concerning spiritual and ideological effects of anthropomorphism applied to artificial intelligence. King Ho Leung writes that the very idea and presence of AI in our world leads to a notion of intelligent thought that somehow exists without life. Artificial intelligence, of course, characterizes a being, a machine, that is not living. Leung reminds us, however, of the teaching by St. Augustine that God is life, life in the highest. As human beings, we participate in that life in a limited way. But we should remember that human intelligence is not merely a collection of discrete capabilities, but an embodied living reflection of the totality of the human person. We can't simply imagine something like intelligence without considering the whole life and experiences of the living person, including shared experiences with others. The very idea of artificial intelligence, however, is contrary to the reality of our human nature. Here then is how anthropomorphism is related to the sin of acedia. As I have shown, if AI-governed applications and machines proliferate throughout our culture, their anthropomorphic illusion will likely distort the evaluation of humanity's intrinsic dignity and the sources of that dignity. Any confusion or degradation of human beings' spiritual destiny is a threat to their understanding of their special relationship with God, appreciation of grace and its power in virtuous transformation, and focus on the divine good offered in the sacrifice and redemption of Christ. We have here a combination of 1, turning away from the divine good as it is participated in by us, and 2, depressed or resistant sorrow, anxiety, and restlessness, a combination that potentially represents or encourages the sin of acedia. In my book, I present a lot of information about how the very structure of AI leads to instrumental rationality. I also discuss more about anthropomorphism and several other problem areas. These include tendency toward mediocrity and standardization of human life, biases found in the data and AI operations, manipulation, persuasion, and deception by AI models, the potential for lost memories and meaning in various ways, loss of privacy, troublesome personal relationships with AI chatbots and robots, the possibility of increased loss of trust in science, and problems associated with enhanced prediction power and the associated loss of serendipity. In each of these areas, I focus on how they are related to the vice of instrumental rationality and how they might motivate persons toward the sin of acedia. Thank you very much for listening. If you're interested in learning more, here is the web address for my book. It is available for purchase on Amazon and elsewhere, such as Barnes & Noble. Please buy the book, support my work, and share it with others, and be sure to leave a review on Amazon. I also included here my personal web page that lists my publications and on which you can send a message if you want to contact me with questions or anything else. I do enjoy conversations and questions, so please feel free to contact me. I'll also be available for speaking and writing on these topics, so please contact me to explore such opportunities. Finally, in the following slides are references to publications I relied on for this presentation. Thank you, and God bless you.